I still remember the way my phone screen lit up that night. The soft glow against my worn-out blanket, the name flashing across the top, Daniel. My son, my everything. It was almost midnight. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that only old walls know. I had just finished wrapping his Christmas gifts a wool coat he'd been eyeing for months, and a watch I couldn't really afford, but bought anyway. Because that's what mothers do. We give, even when no one's watching, even when no one remembers. When I saw his name, a smile tugged at my lips. I thought maybe he wanted to say goodnight. Maybe he was missing me. Maybe he just remembered that his old mother still waited for his voice at the end of each day. But when I opened the message, that smile faded before it even had a chance to settle. "Hey, Mom, can we talk tomorrow?" That was it. No heart. No love you. No warmth. Just 7 words that felt like the end of something I couldn't name. My heart sank before my mind even processed it. It wasn't the message itself, it was the timing. Christmas Eve. The one night I always waited for his call. The night I stayed up baking his favorite cinnamon rolls, the ones he used to sneak from the oven as a boy, laughing with sugar all over his face. Now he was 32. Married, busy, successful. Too busy, apparently, for a few minutes of conversation. I tried to shake off the sinking feeling. He's probably tired, I told myself. He'll call tomorrow. Maybe he's planning a surprise. But deep down, that whispering ache, the one that mothers always try to silence it, told me the truth. Something had changed. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The shadows from the streetlight outside flickered across the old photo frames on my wall, Daniel's graduation picture, his first soccer medal, his wedding day smile. I used to think those frames were filled with memories. Now they felt like ghost reminders of a time when love was simple, and I was still needed. When morning finally came, I got up before the sun. I made coffee, watered the little poinsettia on the windowsill, and watched the frost melt slowly from the glass. Then I picked up my phone again. No missed calls. No new messages. I told myself not to be silly. He said we'd talk today. So I waited. And waited. By noon, the waiting started to ache. I decided to do something I hadn't done in years, bake his favorite cinnamon rolls from scratch. The smell of butter and sugar filled the kitchen, soft and familiar, wrapping around me like a memory. I imagined him walking through the door again, tall and smiling, saying, "Mom, it smells amazing in here." But the only sound was the ticking clock. When the phone finally buzzed around 3 p.m., my heart jumped. I wiped my hands on my apron and hurried to pick it up. It was a text, not a call. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to say I won't be able to make it home for Christmas this year. Things are a bit hectic. We'll make up for it soon, okay?" I froze. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. I read the message again, as if maybe the words would change the second time. Not make it home? Christmas? The one day he always promised no matter what, "Mom, I'll be there every year." For a long minute, I didn't know what to say. My hands trembled as I typed back, trying to sound normal. "Oh, that's okay, sweetheart. I understand. Work must be keeping you busy." I stared at those words. They looked too calm for how I felt inside. Because the truth was, I didn't understand. Not at all. When Daniel's father passed away 10 years ago, I'd sold almost everything to keep the house, the one Daniel grew up in, the one he used to call home no matter what. I'd taken a small job at a local bookstore, saved every penny, and put it all toward paying off the mortgage. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar it was for him. He never knew how many nights I ate soup just so I could afford his college rent. He never asked how I managed to send him that emergency check when his car broke down in his senior year. And I never told him because love doesn't demand gratitude. It just gives. But now, reading his message, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, just quietly, like the sound of snow melting off a roof. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the plate of cinnamon rolls. The steam had faded, leaving them cool and untouched. It was strange how something so warm could feel so hollow now. The rest of the day passed in slow motion. I wrapped his gifts anyway out of habit more than hope. I tied the same red ribbons I'd used since he was a kid. Then I placed them neatly under the tree, even though I knew no one would be there to open them. That evening, the neighborhood lights flickered on, one by one. Families laughed outside, kids threw snowballs. Someone played Christmas music a little too loud, but it all sounded distant, like a world I didn't belong to anymore. I made myself a small dinner: mashed potatoes, roasted chicken, and a glass of cheap wine. I sat by the window watching the snow fall, each flake dissolving before it reached the ground. And I thought maybe this is what getting older feels like. Not the wrinkles or the aches, but the quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when the people you love start living lives that no longer include you. Later that night, my neighbor, Mrs. Green, stopped by with a plate of cookies. She smiled, her eyes kind but cautious. "Daniel, not coming this year, dear?" I forced a smile. "No, not this year. He's busy." She nodded knowingly. "They always are, aren't they? Until they're not." Her words lingered long after she left. I went to bed that night feeling heavier than I could explain. The kind of heavy that doesn't sit in your body, but in your heart. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel as a little boy again, running through the snow, calling, "Mom, come see the tree." And I wondered, when did that boy disappear? When did love turn into obligation? The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke up early, out of habit. I brewed coffee for two, even though I knew I'd drink both cups myself. I set out 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 cinnamon rolls. And for a moment, I imagined him walking in again, tired from travel, cheeks flushed from the cold, hugging me with that warmth only sons can give their mothers. But when the clock struck 10, the door stayed silent. By noon, I stopped pretending. I took a deep breath, picked up my phone, and opened my banking app. I scrolled to the account where Daniel's mortgage payment automatically deducted every month the payment I had quietly been covering for him since he lost his job last year. He had promised to take it back soon. He never did. My thumb hovered over the cancel auto payment button. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I pressed it. Not out of anger, not even out of revenge, but because something inside me finally understood love isn't supposed to be one-sided. It isn't meant to be invisible. That night, I sat by the fire sipping tea. The silence didn't hurt as much this time. It was still there, but it felt different, stronger. Because maybe love means knowing when to stop giving, when to let others learn what you can't keep teaching for free. And as the flames danced softly across the walls, I whispered to myself, "Merry Christmas, Daniel. I hope one day you'll understand what love really costs." Sometimes, when people see a strong woman, they forget she wasn't born that way. Strength isn't something you inherit, it's something life forces into you, one heartbreak at a time. Long before that midnight message, before the quiet Christmas, before Daniel's distance, there was a little house with cracked paint, a garden full of weeds, and a woman who refused to give up. That woman was me. I was only 23 when Daniel was born. Back then, I believed in promises the kind people make under starry skies, holding hands, swearing they'll never leave. Daniel's father, Mark, was one of those people. Kind eyes, big dreams. The type of man who could make you laugh even when the world was crumbling around you. For a while, life was simple. We didn't have much: a second-hand car that coughed every morning, a leaky roof that dripped when it rained, but we had love. And that made everything feel possible. Then came the layoffs. Mark lost his job at the factory the same week Daniel turned 4. The bills stacked up faster than we could open them. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with a calculator, trying to make numbers stretch that simply wouldn't. Mark tried his best. He really did odd jobs, long hours, sleepless nights, but stress changes people. It eats at them quietly until there's nothing left but frustration and silence. And one day, he just didn't come home. No note, no goodbye, just absence. I remember the night it happened, the sound of the rain against the window, Daniel asking, "Mommy, where's Daddy?" And I didn't have an answer. So I told him the only thing I could. "He's working late, sweetheart. He'll come home soon." But deep down, I knew he wouldn't. That night, I stayed awake until morning, sitting on the floor beside Daniel's bed, watching his small chest rise and fall as he slept. And I made a promise not to Mark, not to anyone else but to myself. He will never go without. I'll make sure of it. From then on, life became about survival. I took a job at a local diner, 5 a.m. to 3 p.m., pouring coffee, wiping counters, pretending my feet didn't ache. Then I'd rush to the library across town, where I worked the evening shift shelving books until 9. By the time I got home, Daniel was usually asleep, his dinner plate covered with foil on the table. Some nights I'd sit there quietly, eating the leftovers, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, my only companion. I'd stare at the small photo of him and me taped to the wall, his messy curls, my tired smile. That photo became my reason for everything. And no matter how tired I was, I'd still wake up early to make him breakfast. Pancakes on Fridays, oatmeal with honey on Mondays. Because I wanted him to have something constant, something warm, even when life wasn't. Daniel was a bright kid, always curious, always kind. He'd help the old lady next door carry her groceries. He'd bring me flowers from the schoolyard, sometimes just dandelions, but he'd say, "They're still flowers, Mom. They just don't know it yet." Those little things, they made the hard days worth it. When he turned 10, his school announced a field trip to the Science Museum. He came running home, eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, they're going to show real rockets. Can I go, please?" The trip cost $25. Back then, $25 felt like $200 to me. That night, I worked an extra shift cleaning the diner after hours. My hands smelled of bleach, my feet ached so bad I could barely stand, but I tucked that money into an envelope labeled "Field Trip." The next morning, when I gave it to him, he hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "You're the best mom ever," he whispered. And for that one moment, I believed it. Years passed. Daniel grew taller, sharper, more ambitious. He wanted to be an engineer, said he wanted to build things that made people's lives easier. I smiled every time he said that because he didn't know how much I'd already built for him in silence. When he got into college, a dream university miles away, I was proud beyond words. But pride doesn't pay tuition. The acceptance letter came with a $20,000 a year price tag. So I sold the car, took another job at the local bookstore. And when even that wasn't enough, I started sewing for neighbors in the evenings, patching jeans, hemming curtains, mending lives one stitch at a time. I didn't tell him. I wanted him to focus on his dreams, not my struggles. Every time he called, I made sure my voice sounded steady. "I'm doing great, sweetheart. How's class? Don't worry about me. Just study hard, okay?" He never asked about the dark circles under my eyes or the calluses on my hands. And I never volunteered the truth. That's the thing about mothers, we hide our pain so our children can walk lighter. I still remember the night he graduated. The auditorium was packed, everyone cheering, cameras flashing. When his name was called, my heart felt like it might burst. He walked across that stage, tall and confident, and for a moment, I saw every version of him, the little boy with dandelions, the teenager fixing his bike, the young man who once said, "Mom, I'll make you proud someday." And he did. After the ceremony, he hugged me in the crowd, his cap tilted sideways. "I did it, Mom. We did it." And I smiled through tears. "Yes, baby, we did." I didn't tell him I had skipped meals to afford the bus fare to get there. I didn't tell him that I pawned my wedding ring for his last semester's books. Because love doesn't need applause. It just needs purpose. Then came the real world. Daniel moved to the city for his first job. I helped him with the deposit on his apartment from my savings, the one I'd quietly built over 2 decades. He promised to pay me back. I told him not to worry. He started calling less after that. At first, it was once a day, then once a week, then once a month. Whenever he did call, he sounded distracted. I'd hear laughter in the background, voices, clinking glasses. He'd say, "Sorry, Mom, just at dinner with the team, or I'll call you later, okay?" But later rarely came. Still, I told myself this was normal. Kids grow up. They have lives. It's part of letting go. But letting go doesn't hurt any less just because it's expected. A year later, he called with excitement I hadn't heard in years. "Mom, I met someone." Her name was Emma Smart, beautiful, kind. At least, that's how he described her. I was happy for him, truly. When he brought her home for the first time, I made all his favorite dishes, set the table with the fancy plates I'd been saving. Emma was polite, too polite. The kind of polite that keeps a little distance. She smiled, complimented the food, thanked me, but her eyes never really met mine. And I noticed how Daniel laughed differently around her, louder, prouder, as if he was trying to prove something. After dinner, I offered to pack leftovers. She declined. "We don't really eat heavy at night," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That night, when they left, I stood by the door for a long time after, listening to the echo of silence filling the hallway. They married the following year. A small ceremony, just close friends and family. I watched him stand at the altar, my baby boy, and wondered where the time had gone. When the priest said, "Do you promise to love her, protect her, and put her first always?" Daniel nodded without hesitation. And for a moment I felt both pride and pain collide inside me, because he didn't realize he'd already broken that promise once, not to Emma, but to me. After the wedding, things changed fast. Calls turned to texts. Texts turned to nothing. He started missing my birthdays, forgetting anniversaries, skipping visits. And every time I asked, he'd say, "Sorry, Mom, we've just been busy." Busy. That word, it became a wall between us. 2 years later, he lost his job. The company downsized. He called me that night, the first time in months, his voice shaking. "Mom, I don't know what to do. The bank's calling about the mortgage. I'm going to lose the house." And without thinking twice, I said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll handle it." He protested, of course, said he couldn't let me. But I could hear the fear in his voice, the same fear he had as a child when thunderstorms scared him. So I took over his payments quietly, without telling anyone. Month after month, I sent the money. I cut my own expenses. I stopped buying new clothes. I canceled my small vacations. And every time I saw the confirmation message from the bank, it gave me peace, not because it was easy, but because it meant my son wouldn't fall. Not yet. He never asked how I managed. He just said, "Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver." And that was enough. For a while. But life has a way of testing love, doesn't it? It waits until you're worn down, until you've given everything, then it asks, "What now?" And that question came the night before Christmas. That simple text, "Can we talk tomorrow?" felt like the world reminding me that sometimes the people you build your life around forget that you even exist. As I sat by the window that night, watching the snow drift across the street, I realized something I never wanted to admit. I had spent my entire life being Daniel's foundation. And somewhere along the way, he'd learned to stand tall without ever looking down to see what was holding him up. That was the beginning of the end. The quiet before the storm. Because soon, the woman who had given everything, her youth, her savings, her love, would finally understand what it means to take something back. Not to hurt, not to punish, but to finally teach. And that's when my story, our story, truly began. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, it comes from being forgotten. After that Christmas message, the one that said, "Can we talk tomorrow?" I barely slept. I kept thinking maybe he was planning a surprise. Maybe he'd visit after all. I tried to calm my racing thoughts, but deep down, I knew better. Mothers always know. Morning came with pale sunlight spilling through the curtains, and my house, once warm and alive, felt like an empty shell. The living room still had the decorations I'd put up weeks ago. The small tree in the corner, a few paper ornaments Daniel made when he was little, and the old star we used to hang together every Christmas Eve. I stared at it for a long time. That star used to mean hope. But that morning, it just looked tired like me. I brewed coffee, the same way I did every morning. But the sound of the percolator only reminded me of the quiet that had settled into my life. The sound of a home with no one left to fill it. Every Christmas for the last 10 years, I'd waited for that knock on the door. And every year, I told myself next time. But this time was different. This time, I felt it a final kind of emptiness. I opened my phone again and reread his message. "Can we talk tomorrow?" It didn't sound like an invitation. It sounded like a warning. So I waited for tomorrow. And when it came, he didn't call. Days passed, then weeks. No messages, no updates. Just silence. I finally decided to call him. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again the next day. Then the next. Nothing. And then one afternoon, I saw something that changed everything. It was just a random post on social media, one of those pictures people scroll past without thinking. But I recognized the house in the background immediately. It was Daniel's. He was standing beside Emma, both smiling in front of a glowing Christmas tree. a perfect picture of a perfect family. There were gifts piled high, laughter frozen in. Pixels, and at the center, my son, looking happier than I'd seen him in years. The caption read, "Our first Christmas together, just us. New traditions, new beginnings." I stared at it for what felt like hours. My hands were shaking. Just us. Those two words cut deeper than anything he could have said. I had canceled my own Christmas dinner because I thought he needed space. I had sat alone, thinking maybe something was wrong. Maybe he was struggling again. But no, he hadn't been struggling. He'd been celebrating. Just without me. That night, I didn't cry. I thought I would. But the tears just didn't come. Instead, there was this strange calm, like a wave of realization washing over me. He didn't just forget to visit. He chose not to. All those years of sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the double shifts, the mortgage payments I quietly made to save his home, all of it had turned invisible. I had become invisible. To my own son. And that's when something inside me shifted. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel pity for him. I didn't feel sadness. I felt clarity. Because sometimes love doesn't end with hate, it ends with truth. A few days later, I got a letter from the bank, an automatic notice confirming another mortgage payment withdrawal. The house was still under my name. I'd been paying for it without question, without pause, because that's what mothers do. But now, my hands hesitated. I looked at the amount, the same 4 digits I'd been sending every month, and for the first time, I thought, why? Why am I paying for a home I'm not even welcome in? Why am I building comfort for someone who erased me from his life? It wasn't anger, it was awakening. So I called the bank. "Hello," I said softly. "I'd like to stop the automatic transfers for the property on Hawthorne Avenue." The woman on the other end paused. "Are you sure, ma'am? It's been consistent for years." "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'm sure." And just like that, 20 years of blind love turned into a quiet act of freedom. 2 days later, Daniel called. It was the first time I'd heard his voice in almost 2 months. "Mom." "Hey, the bank called me today. They said something. About a missed payment? Did something happen?" For a moment, I almost slipped back into the old habit, apologizing, explaining, fixing things for him. But not this time. I took a deep breath and said, "Yes." I stopped making the payments. There was a silence on the line. Then, disbelief. "Wait, what do you mean you stopped? You can't just, Mom, they'll foreclose on the house." "I know," I said simply. "But it's your house, Daniel. It's time you take care of it yourself." He was quiet for a moment. Then his voice rose, frustration spilling out. "Mom, you don't understand. Things are tight right now. Emma's between jobs and I understand perfectly," I cut in. My tone was calm, but inside my heart was pounding. "You've built a life, Daniel. A beautiful one. It's not my job to hold it up anymore." He was stunned. I could hear it in the silence that followed. Then came the words that broke what little was left of me. "So, what, you're just giving up on me now?" I laughed softly. It wasn't a cruel laugh, more like the sound of a woman finally realizing the irony of it all. "Giving up?" I said. "No, Daniel, I gave up everything for you. This isn't giving up. This is letting go." And for the first time in my life, I hung up on him. That night, I sat by the window again. The same spot where I'd once waited for his calls, his visits, his promises. But now, it felt different. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. I poured myself a cup of tea and opened an old journal I hadn't touched in years, the one where I used to write notes to myself during hard times. I flipped through the pages until I found one from years ago, written in faded ink. "One day, he'll see everything you've done. One day, he'll understand." I smiled bitterly. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. But I finally understood something else. You can't teach gratitude to someone who's never had to earn it. Weeks went by. The missed payments started piling up. He called again and again, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry. I didn't answer. I didn't block him either. I just let the silence speak for me. One morning, I got an email from him. It was long, emotional, the kind of message that mixes guilt with excuses. He wrote about how he'd been too busy, how he didn't mean to hurt me, how Emma wanted a private Christmas because of stress. He said he appreciated everything I'd done, but that I should have talked to him before making big decisions. Big decisions. That's what he called it. Not love, not sacrifice, just a decision. I didn't reply, because sometimes silence is the loudest answer of all. Then came February. He showed up at my house unannounced, the first visit in almost a year. When I opened the door, he looked smaller somehow. Not in size, but in spirit. His eyes were tired, his clothes wrinkled, his confidence cracked. "Mom," he said softly, "can we talk?" I nodded and stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table. The same one where I used to help him with homework, the same one where I once balanced overdue bills. He looked around, his eyes landing on the faded photo of us on the wall. "I miss this place," he said quietly. "Do you?" I asked, pouring tea. "Or do you miss the comfort it gave you?" He flinched at that. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I really am. I messed up." I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man he'd become was still my son, but he wasn't the boy who used to bring me dandelions anymore. "What are you sorry for, Daniel?" I asked gently. "For forgetting me? Or for needing me again?" He didn't answer. His eyes glistened, and for the first time, I saw guilt where there had only been pride. That moment wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was closure. Because the truth is, I didn't stop helping him to hurt him. I did it so he'd finally learn what love looks like when it stops being taken for granted. We talked for hours about his mistakes, about mine, about the years that had turned both of us into strangers. And before he left, I said something I never thought I'd have the strength to say. "Daniel, I'll always love you. But love doesn't mean I'll keep saving you. It means I'll let you grow, even if it hurts." He nodded slowly, tears rolling down his cheeks. And when he walked out that door, I didn't stop him. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to be alone. That night, I took down the old Christmas decorations. I packed away the ornaments, the star, the memories. And as I stood there in the quiet glow of the lamp, I realized endings aren't always sad. Sometimes they're just overdue beginnings in disguise. He had played with my trust, my heart, my patience. But this time, I ended the game my way. Weeks passed after Daniel's visit. The air around me felt lighter, as if the weight I'd been carrying for years had finally loosened its grip. For the first time in a long while, my home didn't echo with waiting, it hummed with peace. I didn't expect to hear from him again so soon. But life, it seems, always circles back when people begin to understand what they've lost. It was a cold Wednesday morning when my phone rang. I almost didn't recognize his number, not because I'd deleted it, but because I'd stopped expecting it to light up my screen. "Mia Thompson?" a voice asked, brisk and professional. "Yes, speaking. This is Claire from Hawthorne Financial Services. I just wanted to confirm a few details regarding the property on file under Daniel Thompson." My heart didn't race this time. It just beat slowly, steadily. "What kind of details?" "Well," she said, "since the last 3 mortgage payments have been missed, the property is now under review for foreclosure. As the co-signer, you'll be notified of the process." Her words didn't sting. They didn't shock me either. They just settled into the silence like an ending that had been waiting its turn. "I understand," I replied softly. "You can proceed." She paused, maybe expecting me to protest, to beg for more time. But I didn't. Because this wasn't punishment, it was consequence. And sometimes love means stepping out of the way and letting life do the teaching. A few days later, Daniel showed up again, but this time he didn't come with confidence or excuses. He came with fear. He looked pale, exhausted, the kind of tired that seeps into the bones. "Mom, they're taking the house," he said the moment I opened the door. I nodded slowly. "I know." He blinked. "You knew?" "Yes," I said. "The bank called me last week." His face twisted with disbelief. "And you didn't tell me?" I met his eyes steadily. "You already knew what would happen, Daniel. I didn't need to say it again." He sighed and sat down on the porch step, his hands running through his hair. "I can't believe this is happening. Emma's furious. We don't have anywhere to go." There was a part of me, the old part, the mother who used to fix everything that wanted to reach out, to tell him I'd find a solution. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. So instead, I said quietly, "Sometimes losing something you take for granted is the only way to realize what it meant." He didn't answer. He just stared at the ground. The next week, the notice came formal and final. The property would be repossessed within 30 days. I thought that would be the end of it, but life rarely ties up neatly. 2 weeks later, I got another knock on my door. But this time, it wasn't Daniel. It was Emma. She stood there in a pressed coat, her expression polished but her eyes sharp. "Hi, Mia," she said with a tight smile. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. She looked around my small house, the framed photos, the worn furniture, as if assessing me. "I'll get straight to the point," she said finally. "Daniel's been really upset. I know you two had issues. But this whole mortgage situation, it's putting a lot of pressure on us." I stayed silent. She continued, "I think maybe you don't understand how hard things have been for him lately. He's been trying. We both have." My jaw tightened. "I understand perfectly, Emma. I've been trying too for 30 years. Her expression flickered. "Look, I'm not here to argue. I just thought maybe you could reconsider. Help us catch up on the payments. Just until we get back on our feet." The irony of it nearly made me laugh. The same woman who'd once called me overbearing was now standing in my kitchen asking for help. "Emma," I said softly, "when Daniel bought that house, who signed the paperwork?" "Daniel did," she said. "And whose name did he take off the deed 2 years ago?" She hesitated. "Yours," I nodded. "Then you both made your choice. And now you both get to live with it." She exhaled sharply, her mask slipping. "Wow, I didn't think you'd be so what?" I asked. "Cold." I smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "No, dear, this isn't cold. This is finally warm because it's the first time I've stopped freezing my heart to keep someone else comfortable." She stared at me, speechless. Then she muttered something under her breath and left. When the door closed behind her, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The days that followed were quiet. I thought I'd feel guilty, maybe even regretful, but I didn't. Instead, I felt something new, peace mixed with power. Not revenge, not triumph, just balance. And then, a week before the foreclosure date, Daniel came back one last time. But this time, he didn't come to ask. He came to understand. He stood at the door holding a small box, the kind used for keepsakes. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Mom, I wanted to give you something." I frowned, confused, as he opened the box. Inside were old photographs, ones I thought he'd thrown away years ago. There was a picture of us on his first day of school, another of the two of us baking cookies, our faces dusted with flour, and one from his graduation, where my smile was the widest in the crowd. "I found these while packing," he said quietly. "Emma wanted to leave them, but I couldn't." I touched the edges of the photos, feeling the years between us. "Why are you giving me these, Daniel?" He sighed. "Because I finally get it." I looked up at him, waiting. "For so long, I thought you were just controlling, always wanting to be part of everything, always worrying, always involved. But now I see. You were just there. You were always there. And I took that for granted." The words hung between us, fragile and raw. He continued, "When you stopped paying, I was angry. I thought you were being cruel. But now I realize you were just giving me the chance to grow up. I just wish it didn't take losing everything to see it." My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. Instead, I reached out and took his hand. Sometimes, Daniel, the hardest lessons are the ones that don't come wrapped in comfort. He nodded slowly. I'm starting over. Smaller apartment, less space, but maybe it's what I need. Maybe it's what we need. I smiled softly. Then it sounds like you're finally finding your way. When he left that day, he hugged me not out of guilt, but gratitude. And in that hug, I felt something shift. The bitterness that had once lived in my chest began to fade, replaced by something steadier. Forgiveness. Not because he asked for it, but because I needed it to move forward. That night I sat by my window again, tea in hand, just like the first night all this began. But this time the view outside looked different. The lights of the neighborhood glowed like distant stars, and the silence didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt earned. I thought about all the years I'd spent waiting for love, waiting for gratitude, waiting for apologies. And I realized that the only thing I'd really needed was myself. The woman who'd once cried over being forgotten was gone. The woman who replaced her, she didn't chase closure anymore. She created it. A few weeks later, a small envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a note, handwritten and simple. Mom, thank you for teaching me what love really means. Not the kind that rescues, the kind that reminds us who we are when no one else will. Daniel. I read it twice. Then I placed it in my journal, right between 2 pages that mark the hardest year of my life. And in that quiet moment, I realized something profound. Sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. It's about transformation. It's about becoming the person who no longer needs to be hurt to be strong. As I turned off the lights that night, a small smile played on my lips. He had played with my heart once. He had broken my trust. But in the end, I got to write the final chapter, and it wasn't about revenge. It was about rebirth. Because the greatest power you can ever hold is peace after chaos. And peace, I learned, doesn't come from getting even. It comes from finally getting free. The first morning after Daniel's final visit felt strange, not empty, not lonely, but new. The kind of silence that doesn't ache but breathes. For years, I had woken up to the sound of notifications, reminders, responsibilities that tethered me to other people's lives. But that morning, it was just the soft hum of sunlight through my curtains and the faint creak of the house settling. For the first time in a long time, I felt okay with the quiet. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch watching the world stir awake. The air was crisp. Autumn was nearing. The leaves had started to curl at the edges, golden and fragile nature's way of letting go gracefully. And maybe, I thought, that's exactly what I was doing too, letting go gracefully. I had spent years holding my breath for people who never noticed, waiting for them to apologize, to make things right, to see me. But as I sipped my coffee that morning, it hit me. I didn't need their words to close my wounds. Closure wasn't something you got from someone else. It was something you built quietly, one small choice at a time. That realization was the beginning of everything that followed. A week later, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years: go out. Not for errands or obligations, but for myself. There was a small bookstore downtown that I used to visit before life got too loud. The kind of place that smelled like paper and peace, where time moved slower and people spoke softer. As I walked in, the bell above the door chimed, and for a brief second I felt like I had stepped into another version of my life, one where I had never lost myself trying to hold others together. I ran my fingers along the spines of old novels, poetry collections, forgotten memoirs. Each one seemed to whisper, "You were always more than what broke you." I picked up a book by an author I used to love, someone who wrote about rebuilding, about turning pain into art. The cashier smiled at me, a kind stranger with kind eyes. "Good choice," he said. "Yeah," I replied softly. "It feels like the right time." And it was. That night I stood in front of my bathroom mirror longer than usual. I used to hate looking at myself there. Not because I disliked my reflection, but because every time I did, I saw the weight of everything I'd endured, the sleepless nights, the unspoken words, the compromises. But this time, I saw something different. I saw someone who had walked through fire and didn't let the smoke define her. My hair had a few more grays. My skin wasn't flawless. But my eyes, they were steadier. There was a softness there now, mixed with steel. It wasn't bitterness anymore. It was wisdom. A few days later, a letter arrived not from Daniel this time, but from an old friend, Grace. We hadn't spoken in years. Life had taken us in different directions. Her words were warm, full of nostalgia. "Mia, I heard about Daniel. I know things must have been heavy lately, but I just wanted to say I always admired your strength. You may not see it, but you have this way of rising, even when you're breaking." I sat there, rereading those lines, tears welling up. It's strange how someone's kindness can arrive exactly when you need to remember who you are. Grace invited me to join her at a local community center. She volunteered at teaching art therapy to women rebuilding their lives after hardship. At first I hesitated. I didn't think I was ready to help anyone when I was still piecing myself together. But then I realized maybe that was the point. Healing doesn't wait for perfection. It happens through connection. The first day I walked into that art class, I didn't know what to expect. There were about a dozen women, all different ages, sitting in a circle surrounded by blank canvases. Some were quiet, some were laughing nervously. I took a deep breath and sat down among them. The instructor, a gentle woman with a voice like calm water, said something I'll never forget. "Art isn't about painting something beautiful. It's about painting something true." And so I picked up the brush. I didn't plan what to draw. I just let my hand move. Strokes of gray, then soft blue, then a streak of gold breaking through the center. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't meant to be. But when I stepped back, I saw it clearly. The story of my life. The darkness, the hurt, the cracks, all leading to a quiet light. And for the first time, I felt proud of every part of it. The following weeks became a rhythm of peace I hadn't known I was capable of. Mornings with coffee and calm. Afternoons at the center. Evenings journaling not about pain anymore, but about growth. I started noticing the little things again. The sound of rain on my window. The smell of bread baking in the oven. The way sunlight painted the kitchen floor. These were the things I'd missed while trying to survive heartbreak. And now they were my anchors. One evening, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. "Hi, Mom, it was Daniel." His voice was different, steadier, calmer. "I didn't want anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. For letting me fall. For letting me learn." I smiled softly, leaning against the counter. "You sound good." "I'm getting there," he replied. "I found a smaller place. Got a new job. And Emma, she left. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. Sometimes endings are quiet, and that's enough." He continued, "I thought losing everything would destroy me, but it didn't. It freed me. I see things clearer now. I just wanted you to know that." Tears pricked my eyes, not from sadness, but pride. He was finally becoming the man I'd always hoped he'd be. "I'm proud of you, Daniel," I said softly. "Don't look back too much. Just keep walking." He laughed lightly, and for the first time in years, it wasn't forced. "I will, and Mom, I love you." "I love you too," I whispered. When the call ended, I stood there for a while, the sound of his voice still echoing in my heart. And I realized something profound: forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It just stops it from controlling your future. As winter turned to spring, I began to feel truly alive again. Not the kind of life that rushes or chases, but the kind that simply exists quietly, deeply, meaningfully. I began writing again short reflections, journal entries, sometimes little stories. Grace encouraged me to submit them to a local newsletter. I laughed at the idea, but she insisted. A few weeks later, one of my pieces was published titled "The Day I Chose Peace." It was simple, honest, and, to my surprise, it resonated. People wrote letters saying they saw themselves in my words, that my story helped them breathe a little easier. That's when it hit me maybe everything I'd gone through wasn't meant to break me. Maybe it was meant to shape me so I could help others find their own light again. Pain, after all, is a teacher, but so is survival. One evening, I returned to the same cafe where Daniel's betrayal had first come to light, not to relive it, but to reclaim it. I sat by the window, the same spot I once avoided, and watched the people outside, couples walking, kids laughing, life continuing. The waiter came by and smiled. Haven't seen you here before." I smiled back. "I used to come here all the time. But I think I was always waiting for someone." He nodded kindly. "And now," I said, taking a slow sip of coffee, "I'm just here for the view." As I watched the sun dip below the city skyline, a single thought crossed my mind, quiet, steady, certain. Maybe revenge was never about hurting someone else. Maybe it was about reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away too easily. He had played with my heart once, but I ended the game my way, not with anger, not with destruction, but with dignity. Because in the end, true strength doesn't come from what you lose. It comes from what you refuse to let break you. Later that night, I opened my journal and wrote a letter not to Daniel, not to anyone else, but to the woman I used to be. Dear me, you did everything you could. You loved, you hoped, you tried. Don't ever regret that. The world may not always return your kindness, but it will always reward your courage. You didn't need to win him back, you needed to win yourself back. And you did. With grace, with strength, with quiet fire. So hold your head high, because this peace is the victory you've always deserved. When I put the pen down, I smiled. Outside, the wind brushed through the trees, whispering softly like the universe itself was proud of me. It's strange how life circles back, how the people who once broke you become the reason you learn to heal yourself. Months had passed since that last phone call with Daniel. Spring had deepened into early summer, and my days were full in a way that didn't feel heavy anymore. The art center had become my second home, laughter, color, and courage all stitched together in that little studio with peeling white walls and sunlight that poured in like grace. Every day, I watched women come in carrying invisible weights, stories too familiar to ignore. They spoke in fragments: betrayal, loss, shame, silence. And yet, every time they picked up a brush, every time they turned pain into paint, something inside them shifted. I realized healing wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was made of tiny, ordinary moments that quietly said, "I'm still here." One afternoon, a new face appeared in the studio, a young woman, maybe 23, clutching a worn-out notebook and wearing a bright green scarf that looked too cheerful for the sadness in her eyes. "Hi," she said softly. "Grace told me about this place. I'm not an artist." I smiled. Neither was I once. She hesitated before taking a seat. "My name's Alina. She took a shaky breath. "I just left someone. Someone I thought loved me." Her words were raw, fragile. I recognized that tone instantly. The tremble of a soul freshly wounded. I nodded gently. "You don't have to explain. Just paint." For the next hour, she sat in silence, dipping her brush into shades of gray and blue. When she finished, she looked at the canvas and whispered, "It's not beautiful." I looked at it, the messy, stormy swirls, and said softly, "Neither is heartbreak. But it's real. And that's where beauty begins." She looked at me like no one had ever told her that before. And in that moment, I saw myself years ago searching for someone to tell me it was okay to break. Word spread slowly about the art sessions. More women started coming not just for art, but for the quiet comfort of understanding. And soon, something unexpected happened. A journalist from the local paper visited the center. She'd heard about the woman who turned betrayal into healing. She wanted to write about it, not the scandal, not the gossip, but the transformation. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure I wanted my story out there again. I'd spent years being defined by what happened to me. But Grace said something that stuck with me. Maybe it's time people see that pain doesn't end your story, it rewrites it. So I agreed. The article came out a week later. The headline read, "She chose peace after betrayal. Now she helps others do the same." It was surreal reading my own journey through someone else's words. But the part that made my heart swell wasn't the praise. It was the letters that followed. Women and even men wrote to me from different places, saying things like, "I thought my life was over after what happened. But your story made me believe in beginnings again. You don't know me, but I think your strength saved me." Every word felt like a ripple, small echoes of change spreading outward. And I realized that sometimes the quietest victories reach the farthest. One rainy afternoon, as I was leaving the studio, I saw a man standing by the entrance holding a bouquet of lilies. For a second, my breath caught. Daniel. He looked older not by years but by growth. His eyes, once restless, were calm now. There was no tension, no old ghosts between us, just understanding. "Hi," he said softly, offering a small smile. "Hi," I replied, unsure what else to say. "I read the article," he began. "You've built something beautiful." "Thank you," I said. "It helped me heal." He nodded, looking down at the flowers in his hands. "These are for you. Not to apologize, I think I've already done that too many times. They're to say, thank you, for letting me go when you could have destroyed me." His voice cracked slightly. "You didn't choose revenge. You chose peace. And because of that, I learned how to face myself." I felt a lump rise in my throat. For so long, I'd imagined what I'd say if I ever saw him again. But now that he was here, all I felt was calm. "People hurt people when they're lost," I said quietly. "I was lost too. Maybe that's why I could forgive you." He smiled faintly. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not," I replied gently. "But forgiveness was never for you. It was for me." We stood there in silence as the rain fell softly, washing away years of resentment that no longer belonged to either of us. He left soon after, disappearing down the street, and I knew that was the real ending. Not the day he broke me, but the day I let the pain stop defining me. Later that night, Grace and I sat on the porch, sharing tea as thunder rolled in the distance. She looked at me with that knowing smile. "You did it, Mia. You closed the circle." I laughed lightly. "It doesn't feel like an ending. More like a beginning I was too scared to start before." She nodded. "That's what healing really is. It's not about forgetting the story, it's about owning it so completely that it can't hurt you anymore." I thought about that for a long moment. "You know what's funny?" I said. "I used to think revenge would make me feel powerful. But it never did. It just made me tired." Grace chuckled softly. "That's because power doesn't come from destruction. It comes from peace." Her words settled deep inside me, warm and heavy, the kind of truth that doesn't shout, but stays. A week later, I got an email from Emma. Yes, that Emma. It was short, honest. "Mia, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. But I saw the article, and I wanted to say something. I've been through things since then, hard lessons, painful truths. I understand now what I helped destroy. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you that your strength changed how I see everything. You didn't just move on, you grew. And that's the kind of woman I want to become." I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure how to feel. Once, I would have deleted that message instantly. But now, I just smiled. People make mistakes. Some break hearts, others rebuild them. And sometimes, the same person can do both in different chapters of their life. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Her words were enough. That summer, the Art Center decided to hold an exhibition rebirth in color. Each of us contributed one piece that represented our personal journey. Mine was titled, "After the Storm." It showed a woman standing in a field of broken glass, each shard reflecting a different memory pain, betrayal, loss, but she stood tall, barefoot, unafraid. Above her, the sky wasn't dark anymore. It was gold. When people stopped to look at it, they asked what it meant. I said simply, "It's not about what broke her. It's about what she became because of it." During the event, I watched Alina, the girl with the green scarf, stand proudly beside her own painting. It was full of light and laughter. When she caught me looking, she mouthed, "Thank you." And in that moment, I realized the best revenge is not proving them wrong. It's becoming so at peace that you no longer need to. Later that night, I sat by my window, the soft hum of the city outside blending with the sound of my heartbeat. I thought about everything, the pain, the betrayal, the years of rebuilding, and suddenly it didn't feel like a tragedy anymore. It felt like a story, one that had finally found its rhythm. Some people might call what happened to me a downfall. But I know now it was an awakening. Because the truth is, life doesn't break you to punish you. It breaks you to rebuild you into someone stronger, wiser, freer. I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer, I forgive, I release, I rise. And just like that, the heaviness that once filled every corner of my heart was gone. A few days later, I returned to the same park where Daniel and I had once spent countless evenings. The benches were different now, painted fresh, but the air carried the same quiet hum of life. I sat there watching the sunset. The colors reminded me of my painting gold bleeding into the horizon, the promise of peace after chaos. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and smiled, because finally I wasn't waiting for anything. Not an apology, not validation, not revenge, just peace. As I stood up to leave, I whispered not to anyone in particular, but to the woman I used to be. You survived. And you did it beautifully. Sometimes the best revenge is the life that doesn't look like what they expected, the smile that isn't forced anymore, the quiet confidence that doesn't need to be loud. He played with my heart once, but I ended the game my way, not with bitterness, not with rage, but with grace. And that's how peace wins. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, painting my room in gold. For the first time in a long time, I woke up without that heavy feeling in my chest. No ghosts whispering from the past. No shadows of old memories lurking behind my thoughts. Just peace, quiet, steady, and honest. I got out of bed, made myself tea, and opened the window. The breeze carried the scent of rain-soaked grass and distant flowers. Life felt different now, not because the world had changed, but because I had. The version of me that once lived in fear of being hurt again. She was gone. It started with an email. Simple subject line, Community Arts Summit, Speaker Invitation. At first, I thought it was spam. But when I opened it, I froze. Dear Mia, we've been following your work at the Art Center and your recent feature in the paper. Your story has inspired so many, and we'd love for you to share it at our upcoming summit on art and emotional healing. We believe your voice could change lives. Sincerely, the Summit team. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my heart fluttering between disbelief and fear. Me? A speaker? For years, I'd been the one listening to others, now they wanted me to talk. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and smiled. The old Mia would have said no, she would have hidden behind doubt and comfort. But this Mia? She said yes. The summit was held in a large auditorium downtown. Rows of faces filled the seats, strangers, yet somehow familiar. Each one had that same look I once carried, a mixture of pain and hope. When they called my name, I walked up to the stage. My palms were sweaty, but my heart was steady. I hadn't written a script. I didn't want to read something rehearsed. I wanted to speak the truth raw, unfiltered, real. I looked out at the audience and said quietly, "A few years ago, I thought my story was over. I thought heartbreak had broken me beyond repair. But I was wrong." The room fell silent. Sometimes life doesn't take away what we love to punish us, it does it to wake us up, to show us who we really are beneath the pieces we lose. I told them about the night I saw that photo, the way my world shattered, the way silence became both my enemy and my teacher. I spoke about rebuilding, about art, about choosing peace over revenge. They say forgiveness is weakness, I said softly. But I've learned it's the bravest thing we can ever do. Because when you forgive, you stop letting the past write your story. By the time I finished, I could see people wiping their eyes. Some stood, others simply nodded, as if something inside them had shifted. It wasn't applause that filled the room, it was understanding. And in that moment, I realized my pain had become my purpose. After the event, people came to speak with me, some to thank me, others just to share their stories. But one man lingered quietly near the back of the room, waiting until everyone else had left. He looked to be in his mid-30s, tall, with kind eyes and an easy smile. When he finally approached, he said, "You don't know me, but your words. They hit home." I smiled gently. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Liam," he said. "I'm a writer. I actually came to this summit because I've been trying to finish a book about starting over after loss." "That's a heavy subject," I said softly. He nodded. "Yeah, I lost my wife 2 years ago. I thought I'd never write again. But hearing you today reminded me why I started. There was no romantic tension, no cinematic spark, just a quiet connection. Two people who understood pain, meeting in a moment of honesty. We talked for a while about writing, healing, the messy beauty of rebuilding yourself. Before he left, he said something that stayed with me. You know, sometimes the people who've been through storms aren't looking for sunshine. They're looking for someone who knows how to dance in the rain. And for the first time in years, I laughed. Really laughed. Over the next few weeks, Liam and I crossed paths more often at local events, coffee shops, even once at the art center. He volunteered to help organize the next exhibition, saying he wanted to be around stories that heal. Our conversations were never rushed. There were no grand confessions, no promises. Just two souls learning to breathe again. He didn't try to fix me, and I didn't try to fill his emptiness. We simply understood that healing isn't about finding someone new. It's about becoming whole enough to recognize what love truly means. One evening, as we locked up the art center, he asked, "Do you ever think about going back? To the people who hurt you?" I smiled. "No. I think about thanking them." He raised an eyebrow. "Thanking them?" "Yes," I said, "because without the pain, I'd still be the version of me who thought love had to be proven through suffering." He looked at me thoughtfully, then said, "That's the kind of strength people write books about." I laughed. "Maybe you should write it then." "Maybe I already am," he said with a grin. A few days later, I visited my parents after years of distance. They had watched me break, fall silent, and rebuild myself from afar, too afraid to say the wrong thing, too helpless to stop the pain. When I arrived, my mother hugged me tightly, whispering, "You look happy." "I am," I said honestly. We spent the day talking, really talking about everything that had happened. My father, quiet as always, finally spoke up near sunset. "I was angry for a long time, Mia, not at him, at the world, because you didn't deserve what happened. But I see now, you turned that pain into something powerful." His eyes softened. "You didn't just survive, you transformed." Hearing those words from him, a man of few emotions, felt like closing the last open wound in my heart. That night, back home, I sat by my desk and began to write, not to anyone else, but to her, the version of me who once cried herself to sleep, who waited for messages that never came. "Dear me, you thought your world was ending when he walked away. But look at you now. You're not broken, you're blooming. You learned that love isn't about who stays. It's about who helps you stay true to yourself. You stopped begging for closure and started creating peace. I'm proud of you. You didn't let the fire consume you, you became the light." When I finished, I folded the letter and tucked it inside my journal. Not to forget, but to remember. Because the girl I used to be deserved to see how far she'd come. Months passed. The art center grew, the workshops expanded, and every Friday, I'd still find myself sitting at that same corner cafe where my old world once shattered. But now, it was different. The memories didn't hurt anymore, they just existed. Part of my story, not my identity. One day, as I sat there sketching, Liam joined me, holding 2 coffees. He smiled. "Still writing your next chapter?" I smirked. "Always." He leaned back, watching the streetlights flicker to life. "You know, I used to think moving on meant forgetting. But I think it's about remembering differently." I nodded slowly. "Exactly, remembering without reliving." We sat in comfortable silence, no expectations, no pressure, just the kind of peace that doesn't need to be named. That night, as I walked home, I realized something profound. Healing doesn't make you fearless. It just teaches you that fear no longer controls you. I thought of Daniel sometimes, not with anger or pain, but with quiet gratitude. He was the storm that taught me how to build shelter, the chaos that led me to my calm. And maybe that's what love or life is supposed to be, not about winning or losing, but about learning who you become when everything falls apart. As I reached my door, I whispered the same promise I made to myself long ago, but this time, it sounded different. I will never let anyone make me forget who I am again. And for once, I didn't just believe it, I lived it. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my sketchbook, half filled with quotes, half with paint stains. At the bottom of one page, I had scribbled a line from weeks ago, one that suddenly made perfect sense. He played with my heart. But I ended the game by finding peace. I smiled, tracing the words with my fingers. Because that was it. The end and the beginning, all at once. It's strange how time heals, not suddenly, not all at once, but slowly, like dawn seeping into a dark room. One day, you wake up, and the silence that used to hurt finally feels like peace. 3 years had passed since that night when my world fell apart. 3 years since I made that quiet promise to myself that I would never let someone else decide my worth again. And in those years, life didn't just continue, it transformed. I moved into a small apartment overlooking the park, nothing fancy, but filled with light, art, and the scent of vanilla candles. Every corner of that place felt alive. On the walls hung the stories of my healing-framed sketches, photos of students from the art center, and a few newspaper clippings about our work. Because, yes, the art center had grown beyond what I ever imagined. What began as a small studio to distract myself from pain had become a haven for others, a place where broken hearts met healing hands. Every week, people came with stories some whispered, some cried out loud. Stories of betrayal, loss, disappointment, and in each one I saw pieces of myself. I didn't try to fix anyone. I simply handed them a brush and said, "Paint what you feel." Sometimes they'd ask, "What if it's ugly?" And I'd smile and answer, "Then it's real." Because healing, I'd learned, wasn't about pretending to be okay. It was about allowing your truth to exist even if it was messy, even if it wasn't pretty. It was a Sunday morning when it happened. The kind of morning that starts with soft music, sunlight on your skin, and the smell of coffee filling the air. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and froze. Daniel. The name I hadn't seen in years. For a moment it felt like time folded in on itself. All those old feelings, the pain, the shock, the questions flickered faintly, like the last ember of a long-dead fire. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it, breathing slowly. Then, finally, I tapped the screen. "Hey, Mia, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I needed to say this. I'm sorry, truly. For everything. For the lies, the betrayal, and the way I made you feel small when you deserved to feel infinite. I've thought about it a lot, and I needed you to know that you didn't deserve any of it." I sat there quietly. No anger, no tears, just calm. The old me would have written a long reply, asking why, demanding closure. But the woman I'd become didn't need answers. He wasn't part of my story anymore, just a chapter I'd already read, underlined, and closed. Still, out of grace, I typed, "I forgive you, Daniel, but not for you, for me. Take care." And with that, I deleted the thread. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Because forgiveness wasn't about reopening doors. It was about finally locking them and walking away with peace. The day of the exhibition. A few weeks later, the Art Center held its biggest exhibition yet. The theme, Scars That Shine. Each piece told a story of loss, survival, rebirth. It wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. The hall was filled with people, laughter, quiet tears, moments of connection. Liam stood beside me, helping set up the final piece. He'd become not just a friend, but a quiet, constant, steady, kind, never demanding more than I was ready to give. He handed me a frame my own painting. It was abstract shades of blue and gold swirling together, like chaos finding peace. At the bottom corner, a small inscription read, "The storm passed. She learned to dance." I smiled. "Do you think it's too simple?" He shook his head. "No, it's honest. That's what makes it powerful." The exhibition was a success. People stopped by, asked questions, shared their own stories. And in every smile, every quiet nod, I saw reflection proof that pain, when shared, doesn't divide us. It unites us. Later that evening, as the event was winding down, I noticed a woman standing near one of the paintings staring at it for a long time. Her eyes were red, her expression tired but soft. When I approached, she turned to me. "Mia," she said hesitantly. "Yes, I'm Daniel's sister." For a heartbeat, I couldn't speak. Then I nodded. "Oh, hi." She sighed, eyes glistening. "I just wanted to say thank you. He told me you forgave him. He's been trying to turn things around. I think your forgiveness helped more than you know." Her words sank deep. I smiled, small but genuine. "I hope he finds peace. He said he hopes you did too," she whispered. "I have," I replied quietly. She hugged me before leaving, and for the first time I felt the story truly end. Not with revenge, not with bitterness, but with understanding. Months later, Liam's book was published. He dedicated it to the quiet hearts that rebuild after storms. He insisted I attend the launch event, even though I hate crowds. When it was his turn to speak, he looked out at the audience and said, "This book wouldn't exist without a conversation I had 3 years ago with someone who reminded me that pain doesn't end us. It refines us. She taught me that healing isn't loud, it's the whisper that says, 'You're okay now.' And though he never said my name, I knew. And maybe deep down everyone else knew too." After the event, as we walked outside into the cool evening air, he asked softly, "So, what's next for you, Mia?" I thought for a moment, smiling at the city lights ahead. "I don't know," I said, "but for the first time, I'm not afraid to find out." He grinned. "That sounds like the beginning of another story." "Maybe it is," I said, laughing. That night, I sat by my window, the same spot where I'd once cried over betrayal. The moon hung low, and the world outside hummed quietly. I opened my journal, the one filled with sketches, poems, and unsent letters, and on a fresh page I wrote, "To the one who once broke me, thank you. Because of you, I learned that endings can be beautiful. You taught me to stop waiting for love to save me, and to start saving myself. I don't wish you pain. I wish you growth. Because, in a strange way, you were my greatest lesson. Sincerely, the woman who learned to smile again." I never mailed it. I didn't need to. Some words are meant to be released, not delivered. Years later, people still asked me, "How did you move on?" And I always answered the same way. I didn't move on. I moved forward. Because there's a difference. Moving on means forgetting, pretending it never happened. Moving forward means carrying your scars as proof that you survived. Sometimes the story doesn't need to end with a grand revenge. Sometimes the real victory is peace, and the most poetic justice is becoming everything they thought you'd never be. A few weeks later, I hosted a new art therapy session. The room was filled with laughter, soft music, and gentle chaos. A young woman approached me shyly after class. She held a small, half-finished painting, jagged lines, stormy colors, hints of gold breaking through. She whispered, "It's not perfect." I smiled, recognizing that tone, the same one I once had. "It's not supposed to be," I said. "It's honest. That's what makes it beautiful." She looked at me, eyes glistening. "Do you really believe broken things can still be beautiful?" I knelt beside her, smiling softly. "I don't just believe it. I am it." Her lips trembled into a smile, and for a second, I saw myself, the girl who once broke and rebuilt. And in that reflection, I knew the story wasn't about me anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been shattered and still found the strength to shine. That night, I locked up the center, turned off the lights, and stood at the doorway for a moment. Outside, the world glowed with streetlights and quiet promise. I whispered to the universe, "Thank you for the pain that made me strong, for the silence that made me listen, and for the ending that became my beginning." And as I walked away, the wind carried a familiar warmth not from the past, but from the peace I had built, one heartbeat at a time. He played with my heart once. But I ended the game by choosing peace, by loving myself, and by writing my own ending.